The Oblates of Mary Immaculate were a Catholic order that operated 48 of Canada's residential schools, including one that became known as Canada's Alcatraz, the Cooper Island Residential School in British Columbia. It was a school where children were given identification numbers that were stitched onto their clothing and put on lists of chores that the children were expected to do. Just another way to take away the child's identity and to take away their name. But so much more was also happening at that school. It sorry. It was the scene of crimes that would haunt their victims even today. As one man, Tony Charlie, would tell a CBC journalist, I have to live my life today with all those things and all those memories, all those incidences, forever, every night, every day. While the victims lived with all that happened there, the school was demolished in 1975. The name of the island was reclaimed as Penalakat, the local First Nation that owns the land. There was an Oblate brother there who committed gross abuses of the young boys who were confined on the island, Glenn Doughty. Within days of his arrival on the island, he was already abusing the boys in his care. He abused Tony, and then he would seek out other boys as well. As Tony's brother James puts it, sometimes he'd get drunk and we all knew every night he was going to be a sexual predator. James still lives on Penalakat. He described abuse so severe that the boys would hardly walk the following day, but James would say none of the other boys would say anything, fearing it would be their turn that night. And remember, they're isolated. They have no one to turn to. For charges that included indecent assault, gross indecency, and sodomy on 11 different boys, the priest would get a disturbingly low 3-year prison sentence. 3 years for a lifetime of trauma on children who had no chance of escaping him and no one they could turn to. And that sentence, well, that was for his 4th conviction. He also had convictions for abuses he committed in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and Williams Lake, BC. He was sentenced to 2 years less a day in Thunder Bay, and then 4 years in Williams Lake. In 1991, he was also sentenced to 1 year for abuses in Williams Lake. Doughty worked at the Cooper site for 19 years. 19 years in charge of the care of children at Alcatraz. 19 years when his abuse was covered. Doughty would be taken in, sheltered, cared for at a retirement home in Ottawa where Catholic clergy who are convicted of sex crimes are offered a home after they're released from prison. 9 convicted sex offenders lived there in 2022. At least 9 at Springhurst residence owned by the same Oblates who operated all those schools. The men there will have their needs met for the rest of their lives. Doughty lived there for nearly 20 years, with free room and board, and then left Springhouse and the order. The survivors don't get such care. When the CBC contacted him to talk about Cooper Island, he said, quote, I've had too much grief over it. I've had so much suffering, so much pain. I want to die in peace, end quote. Because the pain and suffering he inflicted is all about his pain and his suffering. More than 5,000 people committed sex crimes at residential schools during the 100 years that the system existed. Fewer than 50 have ever been convicted. Fewer than 50. The lack of justice is a kick in the teeth, especially when the church would just move priests from place to place, allowed to continue their abuses for years and in some cases decades. In the end, the survivors were able to tell their stories, yes. They received paltry compensation, sure, but they certainly have not received the lifelong care that the perpetrators are offered. And compensation and the ability to tell the stories isn't healing. On top of the abuses that Doughty committed at Cooper and elsewhere, in 2022, the Penalakat peoples found more than 160 undocumented and unmarked graves at the site where the school once stood. Thousands more such sites have been located right across Canada, with only a small area searched. 160 burial sites unmarked, kids just buried without their names, without any documentation, no records kept. The school stole their identities, their innocence, their families in life, and then once more in death. Where is the care being offered to the families of those children? If this story has affected you, the residential school crisis line is down below. Please take care of yourself first. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying these videos and you want to see more, please click the subscribe button and hit those notifications so that you don't miss any uploads. We appreciate you. Thanks.